Another thing that hospitality is that it's not a bait and switch. It's not an opportunity to welcome your neighbor into your door and then hit them over the head with the Bible. We're not salesmen for Jesus. We don't have to pitch Jesus to people. Instead, we're going to let people see Jesus through our lives and through our stories and see the life that we have. And we'll talk more about that later. So, in its most basic form, hospitality is love of the stranger. As I've been studying and researching for today, I've really become convinced that hospitality is more of a heart posture than just a single action or practice. It's something that we can carry with us everywhere we go. So when you go to the grocery store, imagine you're carrying the kingdom of God and the presence of his Spirit with you everywhere you go. And I witnessed somebody do this really well a couple weekends ago. Angel was with me at the farmer's market, and we went to go to a coffee shop, and we order our drinks. I step off to the side, and she stays at the counter, and she asks the barista such intentional questions. She's curious about this person, not just in a way of like, oh, I'm killing some time as I wait for you to make my latte, but in a way of like, I genuinely see you and care about you. I think we all can take a note from Angel's book. John Mark Comer has a definition that I really like, because while, hospitality as a heart posture is great, it's also really, really broad. And today I want to focus it down a bit more, and we're going to talk about our homes and how to use hospitality within our homes and spaces. So John Mark Comer says, hospitality is expressing the welcome of God the Father through tangible acts of love, ideally through the giving of food, shelter, and relationship. Which, as we talked about the why, we see God doing that continually for us and for his people. Rosario Butterfield, she wrote a wonderful book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. I recommend each of you read it. It was so encouraging and challenging to me. This is what it looks like. The library has a copy, so you don't have to even buy it, but you have to wait for me to return it first. But she calls it radically ordinary hospitality, which I love. So it's radical in that it's so against counterculture, like it's against what the culture expects, but it's ordinary. It happens all the time. So hospitality is invitational. It doesn't shut somebody out based on likes and dislikes. And in fact, Jesus actually tells us, don't invite your friends and families over. In fact, invite the stranger, the orphan, the alien, and the widow instead. In Luke 14:12-14, he says, then Jesus said to the host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers, or relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So hospitality, Christian hospitality, is invitational. It's an open door to the poor, to the sick, to the outcasts, the brokenhearted, the overlooked. Rosario Butterfield says, radically ordinary hospitality characterizes those who don't fuss over different worldviews represented at the dinner table. The truly hospitable aren't embarrassed to keep friendships with people who are different. We don't have to approve of everything that somebody believes in order to have them come sit at our table. We just have to love on them and share our story and our hearts with them and listen to their hearts and their stories. So hospitality is generous. It's very giving because the Father is generous with us and we are generous with those around us. And it's spontaneous and a way of life. It's not a date on a calendar. It's not necessarily something that you can plan for a lot of times. Entertaining, you might put a date on the calendar and you'll be planning for weeks or even months for it. But hospitality could happen on a Tuesday when you least expect it. You're like, this person needs to come over for dinner tonight, so I guess we're having an extra person. And the final thing is service is the focus, not showing off. So while hospitality is not a bait and switch, it is a window into our lives as Christians. When we invite people into our homes, we're inviting them to see what it looks like to live as Christ intended. Let them see you pray before the meal or read scripture after the meal. Let them see you struggle through a difficult situation, not alone or in vain. Let them see as you pray for something and see that answer to prayer come about. And let them see and watch as you are formed by Christ. Our culture is not welcome to Christian ideas and ideals and lifestyle. Reaching our neighbors when culture has labeled beliefs and values that we hold so dear as outdated or even dangerous can feel really impossible. But through hospitality, we can show people the life that we experience. If people can see that being a Christian isn't about putting on a happy face and toughing your way through life, they can see what true life looks like. Let them see that your life isn't perfect, but that your struggles are not in vain, and that you are always strengthened by the Lord, whatever you're going through. And our neighbors will never know that we live differently unless we show them and they can see it for themselves. So invite them over to dinner, invite them over to your table. Let your table be the table of the Lord, and let them experience your life changed by God. A key element of hospitality is where you live. As I mentioned, we're talking about hospitality within the confines of your home. And wherever you live, it is a gift. If you live in a home at the end of a cul-de-sac, if you live in an apartment on the 4th floor, maybe you live in an RV park or a dorm room, or you're living at your parents' house, wherever it is a gift. When we bought our home last year, we believed so fully, and still do, that our home is a gift from God, and that it's something he wants us to use for him and for his kingdom. That he placed us in this home, in this neighborhood, in this season for a reason. And I believe the same for each of you. And you were placed by God in your neighborhood for a reason. Our home is not just for us. Our culture wants to tell us that your home is where you go inside and you lock the door and you shut the world out. But God says, invite people into your home. Offer that safe harbor that people need and crave. So in 2 Kings, there's a story of Elisha and a woman who she exemplifies hospitality really well. She doesn't even have a name. She's just called the Shunammite woman. But Elisha is a little bit of a vagabond prophet. You know, he's traveling around, doing the work of God, doing amazing things. And the Shunammite woman recognizes that he doesn't have a place to stay when he comes through their town. So she turns to her husband and she says, let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed and a table and a chair and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. She was so committed to hospitality that she actually did construction on her house in order to make space and room for Elisha. Chrysostom, the bishop of Constantinople in the late 300 ADs, he says this. He says, make for yourselves a guest chamber in your own house. Set up a bed there. Set up a table and a candlestick. Have a room to which Christ may come, and say, this is Christ's room. This building is set apart for him. When we dedicate a space in our home for Jesus, we're so much more inclined to use it, to look for opportunities to fill that space and to serve him. Just like David and Emily did for me at the beginning when I shared that story. Matthew 25, 37 through 30 or 40 says, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Now, the truth about hospitality is that it is inconvenient as well. So what I didn't mention about that story at the beginning with my friends is that they were in the process of becoming foster parents. And the room that I was actually staying in was the room meant for a foster child to stay in. So they had to set aside their plans, their good plans, in order to meet my need that was right in front of them. And this is something that is true when we answer the call to hospitality. We're going to have to set aside our plans. It's going to cost us time, and it's going to cost us money. But Matthew 10:8, Jesus says, freely you have received, now freely give. If we hold on to what we have, whatever that might be, our time, our money, our homes, that is all we're going to have. But if we offer it before God as an offering, he can multiply it and use it in ways that we cannot imagine. So in the story of Elisha, just before we meet the Shunammite woman, we actually meet a widow and her son who are struggling. They're so poor. All she has is 1 jar of oil. And Elisha comes and he tells her, get out every single pot and urn and jar that you have and just start filling them up. And in her faith, she does this. She takes her oil and she starts filling it up. And over again, it fills each pot to the brim until she has nowhere else to pour her oil. And this is God's provision and generosity with us. When we offer what we have, whatever it might be, God can use it in ways that we cannot do on our own. So, are you guys ready for the nuts and bolts? How to do this? How to do hospitality? And before we really talk about that, I want to say, if you're like me, maybe you're building up a few excuses in your head of reasons why you can't do this. Maybe you don't have enough money, you don't have enough space or time, or maybe you're too introverted. So I want us all to just take in a deep breath, release those excuses for a minute, and just ask yourself, do you believe that you are called as a child of God? Do you believe the words that he has spoken over you, over each of us? Do you believe the promises he's made? And do you believe that he desires the good and well-being, not just of you, but of your neighbor as well? So the thing is, the cost of hospitality is high, but the cost of not doing it is even higher. And I want to speak to one excuse in particular, one that I hear come up in the church a lot, and one that it comes up in my heart a lot. I'm an introvert, and I know many of you are as well. But here's the thing. While God created us differently and created us special and individual, he did not create us with a different call in our lives than someone who is more extroverted. We might have to go about doing hospitality in a different way. It might take us a different way of planning or preparation, but that doesn't mean that we get an out or get out of jail free card just because it takes more energy to be around people. So I want to challenge you and encourage you, just I'm challenging and encouraging myself that being an introvert is not an excuse to not be hospitable and answer the call that Jesus has on our lives. And it doesn't have to start out big. You know, with anything you're trying, any new practice, if you start big, chances are you're going to fail and not want to do it anymore. So start small and start somewhere. Maybe just invite one family or one person over for dinner. You can do a prayer walk around your neighborhood or your apartment complex and ask God, show me where you're already working and already moving. Where can I partner with you where you're already working? And look on neighborhood apps, like if you have the Nextdoor app for your neighborhood. A lot of times people will post different needs and different struggles and things on that app, and you can actually use it as a tool for the gospel. And pick one post and address it. Maybe somebody lost a dog. You can offer to pray or come and help them look for the dog. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but prayers for lost items are so powerful. I feel like every time I pray for something, even if it's just something small, God cares about that, and he helps me find it, I think, every time. And if this is all a little intimidating, that's okay. We don't have to do this alone. We are the body of Christ together. We're not called to go individually out and do things as little silos, but to do things together. Christ said that it was better for him to go than for him to stay. That way we each could receive his spirit and become his body, his hands and feet on this earth, all throughout the world. So find somebody else who has this burden on their heart for hospitality as well. Team up and see what you can do for the kingdom together. Now, in order to do this well, we're going to have to make some room. And that's going to probably start in a few different places. One is our budgets. It's going to cost money. It does cost money to feed and house people. So look at your budget and see, are there ways that I can rearrange how I'm spending my money in order to bless people more with what God's given me? And this one's probably a little bit harder for you, especially if you're like me, but look at your schedule. I don't know about you, but my schedule is packed to the brim every week. And thinking of what ways to cut back and cut down in order to make room for hospitality and for the work of the Lord, it's very challenging. But pray through it. Ask God and ask and see, are there things that I can change or do differently in order to make some space? And plan for the unexpected. So Butterfield says that she'll make a big pot of soup or some extra food at the beginning of the day and just see what God does. And I think that this is such a beautiful idea. If you make a big pot of soup at the beginning of the day, chances are you're not going to want it to go to waste. So you're going to have to look around and see who needs to come over for dinner tonight. You have to put on some God glasses and see, okay, God, who is it? Who's going to come over and eat this chili with me? Now, the final thing you need to do for hospitality is preparing your home. And I don't mean doing a deep clean. The idea is not painting a picture of perfection. It's inviting people into your life as it is. So in my house, that means with all the board books all over the floor from one end of the house to the other. Like, if we are so concentrated on just looking good and putting on a good face, we're so much less likely to have people actually step in and into our homes and see what our lives look like. And this is so important, but pray. Pray over every corner of your home, every doorway, every seat around your table, and ask God to fill the space, to come and meet you, to transform hearts, including your own, and see what he does. In closing, I just want to share a story about how powerful this radically ordinary hospitality can be. Rosaria Butterfield, who wrote that book I mentioned, has an incredible story that exemplifies what hospitality can be. She actually started out in her career. She was a professor at a university. She's deep in the homosexual community. She's a lesbian living with her girlfriend. And she's in the process of writing a book that is telling people why the Bible is irrelevant and you should stop reading it. And she wrote an article in a newspaper, and a pastor writes in response to it. And instead of responding out of condemnation or hate, he responds humbly and actually invites her over for dinner. And Rosaria is an academic. And she says, well, I need to talk to somebody who actually reads the Bible if I'm going to write this book about why you should not read the Bible. So she goes over to his house for dinner. And then she goes again. And then she goes again. And through these meals, God begins to transform her heart in powerful and deep ways. And through these meals and through this transformation, she's married to a man and has several kids, some biologically, some adopted. And her home looks a lot more like a Christian commune than it does what we would call a home in modern culture today. People are constantly coming in, finding home, finding housing, a place to stay. When crises happen in her neighborhood, she invites everybody in over a pot of soup and a cup of coffee. She's there to answer questions when people have them, even if she doesn't have all the answers. And I just think that this is such a beautiful picture of what we each can have in our own homes, in our own neighborhoods, what we can offer to those who are lost and hurting and disconnected. So invite people to your table, covered with good food, whether it's lamb with romesco sauce, rice and beans, or even Domino's pizza, which I will not turn my nose up at. And know that you are inviting people to the table of the Lamb. If we start opening our homes and inviting our neighbors, the lost and the hurting inside, I know that our city and our communities are going to become a place of life and hope.